Imagine living in a world where surviving past the age of 13 was a rare achievement, where the most basic necessities of life, food, water, shelter, were often scarce and hard-won. This wasn't a fictional horror story, it was a reality for millions of people during one of the darkest periods in human history. Join us, if you will, as we uncover the terrifying secrets of this ancient era and explore why life, for so many, was nothing short of a nightmare. From the moment a child drew its first breath, it was thrust into a world of unimaginable hardships. The very air they breathed, often thick with smoke and the stench of decay, carried with it the unseen menace of disease. Nearly half of all children, their small lives barely flickering into existence, wouldn't survive their first year. For those who did, the struggle for survival was a constant battle. Malnutrition cast a long shadow over their lives, leaving them vulnerable to a host of ailments that ravaged their young bodies. The streets, often little more than muddy tracks, were a treacherous labyrinth of filth and refuse. Open sewers, choked with waste, ran alongside dwellings, their putrid contents seeping into the very ground itself. Water, the lifeblood of any community, was often little more than a breeding ground for disease, its murky depths teeming with unseen dangers. Rats, those harbingers of pestilence, thrived in this environment, their numbers bolstered by the abundance of refuse and the lack of any effective sanitation. Alongside them, fleas, tiny but deadly, hopped from host to host, their bites carrying with them the invisible threat of plague. Entire towns, once bustling with life and activity, could be decimated in a matter of weeks, their streets littered with the bodies of the dead and the air thick with the stench of decay. The Black Death, a scourge unlike any other, swept across the globe in the 14th century, leaving a trail of unimaginable devastation in its wake. It was a relentless killer, its invisible hand reaching into homes and communities, leaving behind nothing but silence and despair. Over 200 million souls, from the humblest peasant to the wealthiest merchant, succumbed to its gruesome embrace. But the Black Death was just one of many horrors that haunted this era. Leprosy, a chronic and disfiguring disease, instilled fear and revulsion in equal measure. Those afflicted were often ostracized from society, forced to live out their days in leper colonies, their bodies slowly ravaged by the disease. Even seemingly common illnesses, a simple fever, a cough that lingered too long, could prove fatal in a world where even the most basic medical knowledge was lacking. Treatments, often rooted in superstition and folklore, were as likely to kill as they were to cure. And then there were the wars, brutal, bloody conflicts that raged across the land, leaving scars that would take generations to heal. But these wars weren't just about battles fought on distant fields. They brought with them a whole litany of horrors: famine, disease, and unimaginable cruelty. Entire villages, their inhabitants guilty of nothing more than being in the wrong place at the wrong time, were put to the torch, their homes and livelihoods reduced to smouldering ruins. Survivors, those fortunate enough to escape the flames, were left to wander the ravaged countryside, homeless, starving, and desperate. Harsh winters, their icy grip tightening its hold on the land, brought with them their own particular brand of suffering. Crops failed, food supplies dwindled, and starvation became a very real threat. People, driven to the brink of despair, resorted to eating grass, tree bark, even leather, anything to stave off the pangs of hunger. In this world of suffering and hardship, where death was a constant companion, it's perhaps unsurprising that people sought explanations for their misfortune in the supernatural. Diseases, particularly those that defied explanation or cure, were often blamed on witchcraft or seen as divine punishment for sins both real and imagined. Cures, often as barbaric as the diseases they sought to treat, included drinking mercury, bloodletting, and other equally ineffective and dangerous practices. The era was a crucible of suffering, where every day was a battle for survival. The relentless cycle of disease, war, and famine created a world where hope was a rare commodity. People clung to their faith, their families, and their communities, finding solace in the few constants that remained. Yet, amidst the darkness, there were moments of resilience and humanity. Acts of kindness, however small, shone like beacons in the night, reminding us that even in the bleakest times, the human spirit can endure. Chapter 3. Imagine a world where childhood, a time of innocence and play in our modern age, was all but non-existent. Where children, some as young as 5 years old, were forced to contribute to the family's survival, their small hands calloused and worn from labor that would be considered cruel even for adults today. These children, who should have been playing and learning, were instead thrust into a harsh reality where their worth was measured by their ability to work. Their days were spent not in classrooms or playgrounds, but in fields and workshops, their young bodies bent beneath the weight of responsibility far beyond their years. Education was a luxury few could afford, and the concept of a carefree childhood was a distant dream. For women, life was an unrelenting cycle of hardship and toil. From dawn until dusk, they labored tirelessly, managing households, working in the fields, and caring for children. Their contributions were vital, yet often went unrecognized. Childbirth, often perilous in a world lacking even the most basic medical care, was a constant source of fear and anxiety. The risk of complications was high, and many women faced the prospect of death with each pregnancy. Those who survived were often left to raise their children alone, their husbands lost to disease, war, or simply the crushing burden of daily life. Widows faced immense challenges, struggling to provide for their families in a society that offered little support. And yet, even in this world of darkness and despair, the human spirit, that indomitable flame, refused to be extinguished. People found ways to persevere, drawing strength from each other and their communities. People found solace in their faith, seeking comfort and guidance in the face of unimaginable suffering. Religion provided a framework for understanding their hardships and a source of hope for a better future. They clung to traditions, celebrating festivals and holidays with a fervor that belied the hardships they faced. These moments of celebration were a testament to their resilience and their ability to find joy amidst adversity. These celebrations, often rooted in ancient rituals and beliefs, offered a brief respite from the harsh realities of daily life. They were a time to honor their ancestors, to connect with their cultural heritage, and to find a sense of continuity and stability. They were a time for communities to come together, to share what little food and drink they had, and to find moments of joy and laughter amidst the darkness. These gatherings reinforced social bonds and provided a sense of belonging, but even these celebrations were often tinged with fear and superstition, a reminder that even in their moments of revelry, they were never truly safe from the forces that threatened to consume them. The ever-present dangers of disease, famine, and conflict loomed large, casting a shadow over their lives. Chapter 4. The Black Death, a merciless predator, stalked the land, spreading fear and death with every step it took, leaving behind a trail of ghost towns and shattered lives. The once bustling marketplaces and lively homes were now silent, haunted by the memories of those who had perished. Entire communities, once vibrant and alive, were wiped out in a matter of weeks, their laughter and joy replaced by the cries of the dying and the mourning. Their homes left abandoned, their streets echoing with an eerie silence. The emptiness was palpable, a stark contrast to the life that once thrived there. The stench of death lingered in the air, a grim testament to the indiscriminate nature of the plague. It spared no one, rich or poor, young or old. With so many dying, the traditional rituals of death and burial were quickly overwhelmed. Priests and gravediggers could not keep up with the sheer number of bodies. There simply wasn't time nor enough hands to dig individual graves for the mounting dead. The dead were buried in haste, often without proper rites. Instead, bodies were piled high in carts, their lifeless limbs entwined in a macabre embrace and transported to mass graves outside the city walls. There, in pits that seemed to stretch on forever, they were laid to rest, their final resting places marked only by the sorrow of those left behind. There, in pits that seemed to stretch on forever, they were laid to rest, their names lost to history, their stories untold. Their names lost to history, their stories untold. The fear of the plague was a potent brew, poisoning the minds of the living. Fear, a potent brew, poisoned the minds of the living. With no understanding of the science behind the plague, people searched for explanations, for someone or something to blame. With no understanding of the science behind the plague, people searched for explanations, for someone or something to blame. Superstitions and rumors spread like wildfire. Often that blame fell upon the most vulnerable members of society, the poor, the outcast, and those who were different. Often that blame fell upon the most vulnerable members of society, the poor, the outcast, and those who were different. They became scapegoats for the suffering and death, the outcast and those who were different. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of innocent souls were accused of witchcraft, of consorting with the devil, of bringing the plague down upon the land. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of innocent souls were accused of witchcraft, of consorting with the devil, of bringing the plague down upon the land. Their trials, if they could be called that, were a mockery of justice, of consorting with the devil, of bringing the plague down upon the land. Their trials, if they could be called that, were a mockery of justice, fueled by fear and ignorance. Their trials, if they could be called that, were a mockery of justice, fueled by fear and ignorance. Confessions, extracted under torture, were presented as proof of their guilt. Fueled by fear and ignorance, confessions extracted under torture were presented as proof of their guilt, and the condemned were burned at the stake. Confessions, extracted under torture, were presented as proof of their guilt, and the condemned were burned at the stake, their screams echoing through the empty streets. And the condemned were burned at the stake, their screams echoing through the empty streets, a chilling reminder of the darkness that gripped the human heart. Their screams echoing through the empty streets, a chilling reminder of the darkness that gripped the human heart. The era of the Black Death was a time of unimaginable horror and suffering, a chilling reminder of the darkness that gripped the human heart. The era of the Black Death was a time of unimaginable horror and suffering, a dark chapter in human history that still haunts us today. Outro. Life in this era, an era we now call the Middle Ages, was truly a nightmare, short, brutal, and filled with suffering. The average lifespan, a mere 13 years, stands as a stark reminder of the fragility of life in a world where disease, famine, and war were constant threats, yet from the ashes of this dark age, a new era emerged. The Renaissance, with its emphasis on learning, art, and scientific discovery, marked a turning point in human history. Advances in medicine, sanitation, and agriculture gradually improved the lives of ordinary people, pushing back the shadows of disease and despair. Today we live in an age where the horrors of the past are mostly behind us. But the story of this ancient era serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of our own civilization and the importance of compassion, understanding, and the pursuit of knowledge. If this story shocked you, share it with others and subscribe to our channel for more spine-chilling tales from history.